Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to look at pylint and what it is and how you can use it. What I've done is I've created a new project here in PyCharm and I'm going to show you some code that pylint would complain about. So I'm going to create a file called app.py and then we're going to do something like app is Flask name. If name equals main, app.run. So you can see that there are a couple of mistakes in this code, I'm sure. First of all, we've got Flask here, but we haven't imported Flask at the top of the file. And we also forgot to put our colon after the if statement. So this is not valid Python code exactly, but PyCharm realizes that we probably wanted to write Python code because our file ends in .py. And therefore, instead of just saying, this is complete gibberish, it says you may have made a couple of mistakes. Of course, maybe we didn't make a couple of mistakes, and maybe this is another programming language that is very similar to Python that isn't actually Python, and this will be fine. But under the assumption that we are coding in Python, this has a couple of problems in it, which is that we've forgotten to import Flask, or rather, Flask is something that Python doesn't know what it is. It could be a variable. For example, we could, of course, define Flask here to be something else. And then it wouldn't complain about Flask not existing. It would complain about, you're calling this using the brackets, but this is a string, so it doesn't know what you're doing. So anyway, this is the current problem is that Flask is not defined. That means we've either forgotten to import it or we've forgotten to define it. And also there's a clear problem here, which is that we've forgotten a colon. And PyCharm tells you, you've forgotten a colon here. So PyCharm has a way, somehow, of determining that these two things here are problems, right? This is a computer program. As such, it must have some sort of other program or some code inside PyCharm that tells us that these two things are problems. And PyCharm has its own way of doing this, but there are more standard ways of doing this outside of PyCharm. There are ways of finding out problems within a file outside of PyCharm, and that's what a linter is for. A linter essentially goes through your file and applies a bunch of rules, and if any of your lines fail that rule, it says, there's a problem here. In this case, it would go through these files and it would say Flask is not defined, and then it would go through this one and say you're missing a colon there. So let's go ahead into a terminal and we're going to install the most popular linter in Python and we're going to run it through this file and we're going to see what it says. Let's open up a terminal just now. We've got a terminal here, and the first thing we're going to do is we are going to navigate to the folder that contains our file that we've just written. So if you remember, we are going to do cd, and then we're going to type out the path that will take us to our folder. So in my case, that's in Dropbox, Teclado, Courses, Complete Python Course, Section 18, that's where we are now. And then we're in Video Code, Pylint, and End. So this is the path to my project. And notice how the project is called End. That's just for me to structure the code for the course a bit better. Then if we type ls or dir if you're in Windows, you'll see that you've got app.py in here. So this is where our file exists in our disk. You can, of course, navigate to this path using a visual or graphical explorer like Windows Explorer or Finder, but in order to run the linter, we're going to need the terminal. So let's navigate using the terminal and then install pylint. If you only have one version of Python installed, i.e. you've never installed Python other than a single version, you're going to do pip install pylint. If you have multiple versions of Python installed, make sure to select the right one with pip. So that may be either pip3, if you have two versions of Python installed, one Python 2 and one Python 3, or it may even be pip 3.6 if you have multiple versions of Python 3 installed. We've gone through this earlier on in the course, so again, just a brief reminder here. In my case, I'm going to install pylint using Python 3.6. because that's the latest version of Python in which pylint works. At time of recording, pylint did not work in Python 3.7, so just something to keep in mind. It's possible that by the time you're watching this, it already does work. So we're going to do pip 3.6 install pylint. And in my case, it's going to tell me it's already satisfied because I've already got it installed. But if you don't have it installed, it'll tell you the progress and eventually will install it. The next thing you want to do is type out which pylint. And that, because when you install pylint using pip, it's actually going to put an executable program in your path. So you will be able to do which pylint, and this pylint here is the pylint program that we can now run. And if here you get, program not found, or you don't get anything, then make sure that pylint has been installed correctly, and make sure that the 3.6/bin Python folder is in your path. Again, we looked at this earlier on in the course. I believe it was section 13. So just go back if you need to remind yourself as to how this worked. But if you get something here when you type which pylint, which by the way, I'm not sure it works on Windows, but nonetheless, if this works, or if you can just type pylint and you get something out, that means that pylint is working, it's installed correctly, and what you get out when you type pylint is just a help, sort of telling you how it works and how you can run it and so forth. For the majority of your runs, you won't need all of these options. All you'll have to do is pylint and then give it your app. So in this case, I'm going to type pylint space app.py, and it tells me the problems that are in the file. So here it says no config file found, so it's using a default configuration, and then it's saying in line 3 there is invalid syntax. It's saying syntax error. So what we can do is we can go ahead and open up the line 3 and see what happens there. And notice that it says line 3 syntax error. The fact that you've seen a syntax error in line 3 should prompt you immediately to look at line 3 and sort of use all your brain power in determining what could the problem be. Because PyCharm tells us that there's a colon expected, we don't have to use much brain power, but if you were using a different editor that maybe didn't tell you that, you just have to look at it carefully and make sure you haven't missed anything that Python would consider essential. In this case, it's a colon. So we can add our colon there, and then go back to our terminal and run pylint again. And now we get a few more errors. Notice that pylint runs through the Python file first, and it analyzes that. If you don't have valid syntax, like the missing semicolon, pylint cannot process the file and can't tell you what's wrong. So it only tells you syntax error if there's an invalid syntax, like proper, invalid Python code. But if you have valid Python code that's just, missing a few things, it will be able to do that. And now here you can see that it says 3 different things. It says it's missing a module docstring, the constant name app doesn't conform to the uppercase naming style, and also undefined variable Flask. So we can fix those 3 things. Let's go back and start with the first one, the missing module docstring. Every file in Python should, allegedly, according to pylint, have a small comment at the top that uses triple quotation marks explaining what this file is about. So we can write a short comment here explaining what app.py does. There we go. That was a bit more difficult than it should. And that's it. Now, if we go back to pylint and we run it again, you'll see that now we only get 2 things. Previously, our code had a score of -13. Now it has a score of -10, so we're getting better. Not very good, though. Now we've got constant name app doesn't conform to uppercase naming style, and we've got undefined variable Flask. The undefined variable Flask is substantially worse thing to have than a constant name app doesn't conform to uppercase naming style. As you can see, this here is a style thing. This here is a proper error. So we are going to go back and fix the missing variable Flask. Underneath the docstring, we can put from Flask, import Flask. Make sure you have Flask installed if you're going to copy along with me. But nonetheless, as you can see, this imports Flask. Now we don't have a undefined variable. We can go back to pylint and run it again. And now you can see that our code actually goes in the positive and we get 7.5 out of 10. This means that the code is going to run. And it will, as we've done in the past. But it says constant name app doesn't conform to uppercase naming style. Now, this is a style thing, so you don't have to do it, the same way as you don't have to add a doc string to your file. But what this is saying is, you're defining app, and then you're never doing, at any point in the rest of the file, app equals something. So you're never doing app equal anything else. That means that app is a constant that never changes. And in Python, constants are by default always named using all uppercase letters. So it would be something like this. Yeah? Then if we go back to pylint, we will get a 10 out of 10. It says, no problems, your code has been rated 10 out of 10, which is awesome, essentially. In Flask, this is actually not a very common thing to do. Normally, you would name your main app as app in lowercase, but pylint doesn't quite like that. So just wanted to say that the style is something that varies depending on the libraries you're using and the people you're working with and so forth. And also, you can name your variable as an all uppercase thing here. But if you potentially want to make changes, the linter doesn't know that. The linter doesn't know that in the future you're going to want to change this variable. So if you only have this code, it says, this is a constant, use all uppercase. If you then wanted in the future to make changes, like say app equals 5, this would now be sort of invalid style, right? You should have used lowercase letters. So the linter isn't all powerful and all seeing. It just makes recommendations. And often those recommendations are things you should really listen to. And especially if those recommendations are problems within your code that you have to fix, otherwise it won't run. But the style recommendations can sometimes be ignored if you prefer. Okay. Notice that, a reminder, PyCharm has its own linter, so you don't have to use pylint if you are working with PyCharm, but some people like using other IDEs that maybe don't have such good error handling as PyCharm does, and in those cases, using pylint can be very useful. So that's it for this video. Just wanted to show you quickly how to use a linter in Python. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.